An important aspect of problem solving and productive thinking is creativity. Now, of course, uh, even though this is fairly recognized, what exactly creativity is a very exciting ongoing aspect of contemporary psychological research. Now, one way of seeing it is that creativity is a facet of intelligence, at least in Sternberg's theory of human intelligence. According to that theory, there really are three aspects to our intelligence. There's so-called analytical intelligence, and this is really your academic type problem-solving skill, which is what you use when you're exercising, when you're trying to solve things such as analogies, puzzles, the kind of puzzles we talk about today, for example. And this is perhaps not very dissimilar from the type of things that are measured from typical IQ tests. So maybe you have, a series of pictures and you have to understand how they relate to each other, and you have to discover what is the underlying rule, for example. A different aspect, a second aspect of intelligence is practical intelligence. And this is the ability to understand and deal with sort of everyday tasks. You would call this a street smarts. So it's not quite the academic smarts, but it's kind of the practical ability to understand circumstances and deal with them. Now, the third aspect is creativity and so-called creative intelligence. And this does focus on the idea of how do we develop novel ideas and how do we apply novel ideas in new circumstances. And while the exact definition of creativity is still sort of to be agreed upon, I would think that most researchers today would agree that creativity concerns the ability to use knowledge that you already have, so existing knowledge, and skills that you already have, in order to produce something that is both original, meaning new, and also worthwhile. So there are these two aspects. It has to be something that is sort of is new, is innovative in the sense, but it also must have a value. Just creating per se is not enough for real creativity. It has to be creative, it has to be new, it has to be original, but it also must have some kind of value. And the value could be intrinsic, or it could be because you can use whatever sort of creative thought you had in order to solve a problem, etc., etc., etc. Measuring creativity is also a complicated endeavor. And this too is a topic that has seen a resurgence in the last 5 to 10 years, but still is particularly controversial. Now, there are a few ways of doing this, one of which is used fairly often, is the idea of so-called ideational fluency. Now, ideational fluency is a metric by which we count the number of ideas that a person can generate about a certain topic or a certain item. Imagine me asking you how many, can you name as quickly as possible as many uses as you can for a stone? And, you'll start coming up with uses of a stone. Some will be probably fairly close to what a stone does best, which is be heavy. And sort of some of the uses will probably relate to that. And then you will slowly start thinking about more imaginative and more creative uses for a stone. And then you can add up all of the number of uses that somebody has come up with. And this is believed to relate in some way to the amount of creativity of a certain person. And as we're going to see shortly, there actually are additional ways, although not satisfactory, but there are additional ways to measure creativity. So the interesting question, of course, in our context is, does creativity play a role in problem solving? And this was looked at by Tsirlioglu in 2012. And what was done in this research paper was an analysis of the correlation between creativity, or some measure of creativity, and ability in problem solving. Now, in order to look at problem solving and creativity, what they did here was they looked at they used some self-administered scales that are supposed to somehow capture how creative and how, on the one hand, using the how creative are you scale. And you can see that on the bottom here. For example, I always work with a great deal of certainty that I am following the correct procedure for solving a certain problem, yes, no, or uncertain. I feel that a logical step-by-step method is best for problem solving. Yes, no, uncertain, sort of this kind of way. And you can see how this might be able to capture the creative style of somebody, or how likely they are to be creative or not. Of course, it's also self-report, so it has certain biases to it. In a sense, it's easy. I've taken this questionnaire. It's easy to take it knowing exactly how to answer, so that you can look more or less creative according to what is your desired outcome. And then at the same time, people took this questionnaire and then also the problem solving inventory, which is the one that you see, you're seeing sort of the first 5 questions. I think both of these are in the realm of some, I think this one here has 40 questions and this one just about 35 or 36. And this is meant to capture, the problem solving inventory is meant to capture what is your problem solving style. And sort of usually it boils down to a number of different traits. How confident are you about your problem solving? How do you approach problems? And what do you do with problems, once you do or do not solve them? That kind of thing. For example, just to show you read a couple of questions. When a solution to a problem is unsuccessful, I do not examine why it didn't work. Or when I first start solving a problem and I fail, I become uneasy about my inability to solve the problem. Or I am usually able to think up very creative and effective alternative solutions to a given problem, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this also might be a way of capturing how people usually behave with respect to problems, but also, as you might imagine, it does also have certain biases, like old self-report questionnaires. But here the question was, is there any correlation between problem-solving style and creativity? And indeed, what they found was that there is indeed a positive relationship between problem-solving skills and creativity. So the more creative, the better people scored on the problem-solving inventory. And see, if you think back to the idea of functional fixedness, you can see how important creativity might be in the context of problem solving, particularly for ill-posed or ill-structured problems. And if you take sort of the point of view of the Gestalt School of Psychology and insight and the need to restructure certain problems or certain aspects of a problem and certain aspects of the informational content of a problem in order to solve it and to get to a non-obvious solutions, you can understand how creativity might play a very important role. Now, one example of this is the so-called candle problem. And this is a typical circumstance in which individuals show functional fixedness, meaning that they struggle to make non-obvious use of the elements of the problem. So here's how the problem goes. You're given the objects that you see here, so a matchbox with matches, some tacks, and some candles, and you're asked, can you find a way to mount the candle to a wall so that the wax will not drip on the floor? And what is interesting is that when you give this problem to people, they solve it. People spontaneously solve this less than 50% of the time. And here's what's interesting about it. Now, if you're given the problem just as you see here, people, as I said, less than 50% of the time solve it. Now, here's what's interesting. If instead of being given the problem as you see it here, you were giving the exact same problem, however, the matchbox, instead of being as you see it here, would be entirely open and the matches would be out of it. Now, suddenly people become very good at solving it. And see, the reason is that seeing the matchbox without the matches in it makes you realize, so seeing the empty matchbox makes people much more interesting and much more likely to stop seeing the matchbox as a container for matches and to see it as a possible shelf, to see it as something that you can use to tack to the wall and then put the candle on it so that, as you can see depicted here, the wax doesn't drip, which is indeed a solution to this problem. So you can see in this problem particularly how creativity might be an antidote that might allow you to move past obstacles such as functional fixedness, and thus allow you to somehow see possible restructuring that might allow progressing towards the solution of a problem.